Dear beautiful souls, today I would like to speak to you about benefits that have to do with meditating in the pitch black, in absolute darkness. Well, first of all, many mystery schools, even in ancient times, used to initiate their practitioners through meditation in darkness. For example, the Oracle of Delphi would, under certain circumstances, put initiates into a test scenario where they had to meditate in a dark cave for 2 weeks without being allowed to leave the cave. In Egypt, for example, some practitioners were temporarily placed in a sarcophagus in the middle of a pyramid, where they would use the energy of the pyramid to project their consciousness into other dimensions, but it was also done in pitch black. What is the reason for this? Well, first of all, a lot of human beings have fear programming. There are a lot of superstitions when it comes to the so-called supernatural, which is not beyond the natural. Therefore, I find it a little bit of an unfortunate naming of this phenomena, because it is not unnatural, it is just beyond what we call the usual physics that we are the most exposed to. So that's why we call it supernatural. But it isn't. It is part of nature, as is any phenomena. So then, since there are these superstitions that are often even fueled through horror movies, certain type of programming, humans struggle to meditate in darkness. Especially because their own imagination then is running wild, and they start projecting their own fears onto the darkness, and the darkness becomes a canvas of sorts. And there's a fear of being susceptible to dark entities. However, meditating in darkness actually over time achieves the opposite of being vulnerable to such entities. Because through the exposure, through the continuous sitting in darkness over longer periods of time, the fear of it will go away. There will be a form of habituation. Especially when you realize that actually nothing is happening when you are sitting in darkness of a malevolent nature, then at some point your nervous system starts calming down, and then it actually starts getting interesting. Because usually our senses are focused on the external world, on hearing, on smelling, on seeing, on touching, on tasting, and so on. However, when we sit in complete darkness, what happens is that we at least don't get visual input, and the visual sense for humans is very strong. So if we don't get that visual input, there is a decrease of stimulation. And that means our sensitivity to other forms of frequency and vibration increases. In fact, if we meditate in darkness, if we do this over years, what happens is we begin seeing light that is of a spiritual nature that we usually would not perceive because we are distracted, for example, by daylight or by the activities around us. So then we are slowly able to increase our psychic senses through a sort of sensory deprivation mechanism. If we don't give our brain input, especially through digital light, through laptops, through smartphones and so on, then our brain begins picking up on the frequencies around us that are much more subtle. And it takes a longer time to tune into them. So then at some point we can become able to communicate with spirits through sitting in darkness. Of course, that's not the whole secret. There's a whole set of yogas that have to do with that. But sitting in darkness will amplify it, that's for sure. Also, the exposure to darkness and then the learning of reducing one's own reactivity and to not get triggered by one's own fearful fantasies, so to speak, will lead to a decreased vulnerability towards dark entities, because dark entities play on the fears that you have accumulated through, for example, social programming, mass media, and so on. They use these fears that exist in your frequency band to trigger them and to scare you off from, let's say, pursuing certain practices. In many cultures, it was well known that meditating in darkness would increase psychic sense. But it is lost a little bit in modern society because modern society constantly focuses on stimulation. But the reduction of external stimulation leads to an increase of internal stimulation, or at least the ability to perceive it while previously it was overshadowed by the external experience. Also, very beneficial, meditating in darkness increases the ability to do shadow work. Because of an increasing of the psychic sense, we can then use our physical body and then meditate on it to then stir up certain fears, certain shadow projections that during daily life we don't really have access to. So it leads to the idea, even though I understand that's very abstract right now, to the idea of spiritual surgery or psychic surgery or energetic surgery. Any yogi must be able to perform that on himself at some point, where we go into the physical body and then connect through the physical body to our energetic bodies, and then start meditating on whatever is misaligned and bring it into alignment through, for example, vision. So fully experiencing the trauma and then changing our attitude towards it. And when we meditate in darkness, there's little distraction, so our focus is greater. Contemplate about this, my friends. Be well.